Okay, wonderful. Okay, cool. So um, I'll get started, and hopefully more people will join us as well. So first, everybody who's listening, thank you for joining us in the discussion here. Um, my name is Aaron Coleman. If, in case you don't know who I am, I'm the founder of Unsafe Publishing. I'm also the author of a book called Black Victim and Black Victor. I'm joined by two people that were very inspirational for me in my journey to speak out more often, and two of my favorite people on the internet. And I'm glad to call them friends. So, Keri and Clifton, if you want to introduce yourself, Keri, you want to start first?
Well, hi, Adam. Thank you for teaching me about the magic of the Twitter talkies tonight because I've never done one of these before. And I sometimes, I think I listened to part of one once and I was trying to figure out how it worked. And anyway, I appreciate the learning experience. And I love talking to you. So this will be interesting. I'm not sure how much I can add about fathers, um, but I'm open to talking about it. And I love Clifton. I love that you invited Clifton. That's all.
Thank you. Clifton?
Well, you say you love me now. Let's give it another 10 or 20 minutes.
Wait a minute. Are you in a downer mode tonight?
Uh, no, well, I'm laying down. I'm a little under the weather, but and I'm also not sure what I can what I can add, but I'm here, everybody. Let's have a good time, I suppose.
Okay. So I'll get started. Actually, I invited both of them last week because, in general, I want to talk about fathers and the role that they play, um, whether it's from a parental side or from the child side, even to the aspect of if your father is missing, like in my situation, and how that affected me. Um, but actually, interesting enough, Barrington asked a question basically asking, why do women have sex and have children with men who are disinterested in being fathers? And why aren't fathers stepping up and abandoning their children? So I wrote this whole thread, kind of giving like a psychological analysis as to, very generally speaking, as to why this occurs. Um, and it was interesting because coincidentally it happened today where I knew I was going to talk about fathers. Um, a lot of people understood the perspective that I was trying to put out, but I think some people took it as I am trying to say that there's no accountability from the women's side when actually I give how it affects both sides and how both parties play a role into that. Um, Keri, I know a little bit about your upbringing. And I remember listening to you on the Disaffected podcast, where you kind of talked about your family. You were more so talking about your mom, but you talked a little bit about your father. Um, how would you say the role of your father impacted you into your adulthood?
Oh, well, that's kind of a personal question. Let me think. uh, well, look, I have a mother. I have only talked about this once. I talked about it on the Disaffected podcast. So I have a mother
Mhm.
who, in my opinion, has a type of personality disorder. And if anybody's interested in that story, they can watch that episode of Disaffected. I don't really want to talk about it here a lot, but my dad was
Yeah.
he was a strong figure in my life. He gave me a lot of, I think, positive traits. He taught me to have a love of of nature and of reading. He encouraged uh, like our voracious appetite for books and for history when we were young, my siblings and I. He took us on a lot of vacations, and I think he did the best that he could do in a situation with an abusive spouse. However, I don't think I do think there are some things that he could have done differently to protect us. So,
Mhm.
I guess, I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss here because Adam, I haven't really talked about this stuff like publicly before. But if
Yeah.
there's a question that you have like more specific, that's not really, I guess, about my own. I don't know. Could you ask me something specific that I could answer?
No, that's fine. What you gave is fine. I do have a question.
Yeah.
Because you just recently got married. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Um, would you say that, um, like, if you were to think about it, I know it's not usually like a conscious thing,
Mm-hmm.
but would you say that your father's portrayal, you see some similarities within your husband?
I do. My husband is very thoughtful and he has a great appetite for learning, and he's constantly reading and filling me in on what like right now he's reading a couple of different biographies about Lincoln and some about Comanches and Texas history and then some music history, and it's always cool just to kind of hear what he's reading and then share with him what I'm reading, and he's constantly, looking to improve himself. I think some
Mhm.
big differences would probably be, I mean, we don't have kids. We've talked about the possibility of having kids. And what's funny about me is that I guess in the past couple years, I've become a little more conservative personally. I wouldn't say politically I have, but personally, in terms of how I think I should try to live and the choices that I should make and the choices I think are good for humans to make, then yeah, I guess you could call me a little bit more conservative. And so I believe that in a family that the husband should be the leader. This is going to get me probably canceled. I believe that, I want a strong masculine figure in my household, and it doesn't mean I don't want my opinion listened to. Certainly not. I want someone who respects me and listens to my input and values it and considers it. But at the end of the day, I think you can only have one person uh, in that leadership role, and it's not always going to be. It's not one size fits all. There's always going to be some relationships that don't really fit the stereotype of that being more of like the man's role. But in general, I think on
Mhm.
average, I think men are better suited for that. Now I'm going to be canceled for this. This sex is so sexist against women. I have things that are, I would say, areas that I'm stronger in than he is, and but in terms of, like right now we're making a lot of decisions about our home, about finances, and I'm happy to, at the end of the day, have him be I feel comfortable having him be the final word on some of these things after I've weighed in. Does that make sense?
Right.
And so,
No, it makes absolute
yeah,
sense.
and I think if we were able to have children, I would expect him to be more of the disciplinarian, take on a little bit more of that role, and that, he's talked about how I think that would come naturally to him, that he's actually more conservative personally than he would have thought when he was younger as well. So um that's probably, do you know that old 70s band, the OJs?
Yeah,
Do you
yeah,
remember their song Family Reunion?
yeah. I remember we talked about
Okay,
that.
go and listen to the lyrics of that song. They would be so canceled today when they're talking about the role of the father and the role of the mother. I think you could probably say where I've landed at this point in my life, in my early 40s, and thinking about possibly having kids, I've landed at the OJ school of thought. So there we go.
Okay, I appreciate that. Um, Before I go to Clifton, I wanted to say, a lot like your relationship is very similar to where myself and my wife, uh, where we are as far as kind of a more traditional mindset. We are trying to have a child, and she's in a very similar position as you. She's in her early 40s. Um, and, we talk about all the time, how do we want to raise our child if we were able to? And she sees, because I have a 16-year-old, so I'll be starting over if this is to happen. But she sees how attentive I am when it comes to my son, even though he doesn't live with me. but I have a great relationship with him. I see him every weekend. Um, but we talk about the role of the man within the household, and she's told me point blank, you are the leader. And as the leader, you are ultimately responsible. And I think that's one of the things that that feminists or whoever you want to call it, they miss when they talk about men leading. Because when you're the leader, you're also responsible if you fail. That's a lot of responsibility. And so it's a challenge to to take hold. Um, and so it's not, they kind of make it sound like men are these benevolent leaders, but if the family fails, that's a sign that the father failed too. Um, so I think that's something for people to kind of think about. Were you going to say something, Keri?
Yeah, absolutely. And this reminds me of a sermon that my preacher gave recently, and he he was saying that he was talking about a lot of the parents in these school board meetings recently who are learning the kinds of things that their kids are being indoctrinated with, and he was sort of holding fathers responsible for this. He's like, you haven't been paying attention, and it's great that you're paying attention now, but it is your responsibility how your children are raised, how your children are educated, what they're being taught, and what belief system they're being given. If you're not giving them a belief system, you can be damn sure that the public schools are. And so he was saying, it's not the responsibility of the wife. Now that's going to be controversial for some people. Even if your wife is the one who homeschools or he's like, at the end of the day, the bill stops with you. You're the father. And so you have to be aware of what they're being taught. You have to be aware of what kids are, what belief system they're being given if you're not giving them one. And I fully agree with him. It's funny to me now because I still sometimes put myself in my old shoes and look at where I'm at. And I'm like, I can't believe you agree with that, but I do. Anyway, I'll stop talking now.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me your feedback. So, Clifton, I I don't know too much about your upbringing or your relationship with your father. Do you mind? I don't know if it's too personal for you to talk about, but do you mind giving like a summary as far as your upbringing involving your father?
Sure. Well, there isn't one, which is why I'm approaching middle age. My biggest aspiration is to be a mediocre Twitter personality.
All right then. Well, then let me ask the follow-up question. How do you feel that the lack of a relationship impacted you into your adulthood?
It's not something I like talking about, frankly.
Okay.
I'm playing catch up for the rest of my life. Um, what I don't enjoy is the erasure uh, of what men are capable of and what they bring to the table. There's just a lot of narcissism and arrogance, I believe. I mean, I've never heard a single father want to be celebrated and exalted just for being a father and taking care of his responsibilities. However, on the flip
Right.
side, I always hear single mothers want pats on the back um, for taking care of business, I suppose. And I just maybe it's differences in the psychology of both of men and women. Oh, there's a cancelable statement. I'm sorry, I recognized two genders. Sex. Pardon me. I can't interchange sex and gender. But there's a refusal to acknowledge that men have anything to bring to the table. Men, they express their love differently. Their psychology is different. They have different methods and tools for inspiring young men, young children, girls, and especially young boys. They have a connection and an understanding and an empathy innately to their sons that a woman just will not, and they'll be able to examine things from a perspective and again, it's like a psychological profile that that a woman just cannot. And it doesn't mean that she is less qualified to be a parent. It doesn't mean that she does not or is incapable of loving her son. It's just it's just going to be a different dynamic. And most of the well-adjusted people that I've met in my life have good, strong fathers in their lives. I read with envy many stories, many biographies of people who have become successful, who talk about all the things that their fathers taught them, all the bits of wisdom that their fathers instilled in them. And this is not a gender specific statement. It's the men and the women I've met in my life. So um, the erasure of that, especially among certain cultures, disproportionately, I think, it's just a weird thing that we are not allowed to talk about or discuss in the broader, I suppose, in the broader culture, the broader society, or at least in these sort of, I don't even know if I want to call them elite kind of circles, but when you talk to people on the ground, at least in cities like Atlanta, I mean, people recognize what these problems are. I think they're way more reasonable about it, and they see that there's an issue there, especially when it comes to young boys, specifically young Black boys.
Yeah. I hear everything you're saying there. I I think part of the reason why we're not allowed to talk about it, specifically like single parenthood, or AKA single mothers, the reason we're not allowed to talk about it, and I've thought about this endlessly, is because the discussion of single motherhood comes off as an attack on the mother. Um, when in the reality, what we're trying to do is highlight the importance of the father. Um,
Well, it's not even that. It's not even that for me. It's not
mhm,
about saying one is better than the other. It's about talking about what is
right,
best. Well, but it's what is best for the child. The child is the focus. And what I don't understand is
right,
why, on one hand, you have people on one side of their out of one side of their face talking about how uh, motherhood is the most difficult job ever, which I won't disagree with. But on the other hand, they say, well, I want to have this career and do this and that, and there doesn't seem to be any conflict with saying, well, okay, well, how are you going to manage two careers and do so successfully without, unless you have the resources to offload a great deal of your parentage to your Jamaican nannies and or your, like your Latina maid. That's the Upper West Side way of doing things. Um, so and I mean, to my money, it's like, you're even. It's not as though it's a difficult discussion because it also tiptoes around um, a, 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 an issue which I won't call a problem, but it's just very difficult, and that is motherhood and how you handle that in a world where um, women have a bunch of rights and responsibilities that it didn't have up until recently. So how do you balance that? How do you build a fulfilling life, and um, help to how do you help to bolster the idea that women are not merely mothers and homemakers, and but also not denigrating those roles, but also saying, like, there's so many options available, and how can you live a rich and fulfilling and robust, well-rounded life? But it's also, it's just what is more important than raising strong, healthy new people? Your children will outlive you and carry on your legacy, but your career, you can't take it with you. Your career and your money dies with you. So there's
right.
nothing more important than that. And I think that should be, maybe perhaps in a healthier culture, would be more focused on what the health and well-being of the child is, instead of trying to score points about who is better and who is necessary and who is not.
No, I agree. I agree with everything you're saying. I think the key word you use is balance. Like you said, we don't. It's increasingly more difficult to have a single earner home. Um, so, women for the most part have to work, unless your husband is a higher earning man. So that is already kind of a hard thing to manage. Being a woman who at least works part time and raises the children, that's not something that women had to deal with 100 years ago, for example, for the most part. So it is that delicate balance. But what I also sense is that there, in many ways, for a lot of people, they celebrate being off balance. You said, how are you able to manage having a career or working two jobs and raising children? And this is somewhat controversial to say, but as a child of a single parent, it's a failing position to put a woman. I don't think there's any way to win because she has to work, and she has to work an incredible amount, which means that she has to offload the parental portion to, babysitters, daycare, school, whatever. My mom had to work long hours, so I spent a lot of time alone at home with my sister. And so there were a lot of hours in the day where I did not have the nurturing that I needed from my mother. But on the flip side, my mother had to put on a more of a masculine role to lead the household. So my mom wasn't the nurturer that you would think that she could have been. That's why I say it's a failing position because you're having to play two roles at once, which is an impossible feat to do, no matter how special of a woman your mother is. And I say this because I think women are being advocated to become something that is impossible to do successfully. You can raise children, but there are junkies who can raise children too. Can you raise them successfully is a different story. Can they grow up and not feel like a piece of them is missing, or that they lacked in a large way than the kids who live next door to them didn't? Are you able to raise balanced, healthy children? And that's why I write about my struggles of having to really figure things out when other men my age or when I was in my 20s didn't have to figure these things out. They had the guidance of their father. They had a lot of advantages that I didn't have simply by having both of their parents. So it's an extreme advantage, in my viewpoint, that used to be more commonplace. And I don't think it's asking much for people to be more selective about who they have sex with or who they have children with. But I think we have a culture that promotes reckless sex, emotional sex, and not child-rearing sex or planning out your parental responsibilities. And all this does is make more children who have to struggle like myself or worse, who end up dead in the streets or who end up locked up, who end up victimized because they're vulnerable. So, the role of the father is extremely important for myself to advocate for, which is part of the reason why I'm having this discussion. And nobody gets canceled in my Twitter spaces, so you can say whatever you want. Keri, do you have anything to add?
Sure. Just to go back to something you were saying earlier about how one of the reasons it seems like we can't talk about the importance of having a father in the home, and it is important because if you look at any statistics that show, measuring the success of a child in any area of the child's life, that whether or not they grew up in a two-parent home has a lot to do with that, more almost than any other privilege that you could talk about them having. And but anyway, we're not allowed to talk about it. Why? You said something about because people conflate a discussion of the problems that come with a one parent household. They conflate that with like criticizing the mom or criticizing a single moms or something. And I think that's
More like attacking.
Yeah. And I think that's absolutely the case. Yeah. And that's not the only area where we do that. Look at something like the transgender rights activists. So if you say, well, being trans is not the norm, that's now seen as an attack on trans people. It's not an attack.
Mhm.
It's a simple statement. Can we not make that statement? Can we not talk about that? I don't know if I'm articulating this well, but they have this weird, the people who want to direct and control what we're allowed to talk about and what problems we're allowed to address, and who want to limit, what parts of reality we can actually discuss. They have this weird way of saying you can't talk about XYZ or make a statement of fact or opinion without it being an attack on some group of people that's involved in the statement. It's like, no, it's not an attack. And you can talk about how it's, on average, kids do better with both parents in the home. On average, it doesn't mean every kid, of course, if you know how bell curves work. But on average, kids do better
Right.
with both parents in the home than they do in single parent homes. And that doesn't mean anything about, it's not an attack on your friend who's a single mom. it's not like your friend did a bad job. Like, no, it's just saying, like you said, if you care about the well-being of kids, we should be able to talk about the fact that on average they do better with two parents in the home. And hey, maybe we can figure out how to keep two parents in the home and figure out what are the forces that are breaking up families. What are the cultural forces at play that are breaking up families and are specifically taking fathers out of the home?
Yes, that's a good question. What are the cultural forces that are letting that to happen? Well, actually, let me go back a little bit, because I think you make a point as far as, the bell curve, or just as far as what is more likely, or what gives you the better outcome. The higher the likeliness you might want to do something. I give the example of, just because you smoke doesn't mean you'll get cancer, but smoking increases your chances of getting cancer. Just because you have two parents doesn't guarantee that you'll grow up in a wonderful household, but it increases the likeliness that you'll grow up in a well-balanced household. Obviously there are unhealthy two-parent homes that exist, and there's also unhealthy one-parent homes. But why not increase the likeliness that children can grow up in a healthy home and they can grow up in a balanced home? If we can talk about, I think sometimes also, to a fault, we talk about single parent statistics in the negative, and we don't talk about nuclear families in the positive more. And I wish I knew more statistics as far as likeliness to have success or so on and so forth. But I also think more so on the psychological aspect, as to why the father and the mother together create like a balanced home if it's done in a healthy way. So I kind of think from that perspective, which is what I normally write about. I normally state that the most important parental figure is the same-sex parent. But it doesn't mean that the opposing parent has nothing to do with, being important. They just provide something that is different. So, to break down a little bit, for young men, the father is the first and most important male figure in their life. They model their behavior after them. I see it with my son. He watches me. He mimics some of my behavior. He has my temperament. So I'm his example. If I was angry and violent and erratic, he will mimic my behavior. So I'm an important figure for him. If I wasn't here, or if it, like my childhood, my father wasn't there, it was hard for me to mimic any male role model. It's because we moved a lot. My mom didn't really have any relationships. And so I was kind of lost as far as how to be a man, how to behave like a man, what are good masculine traits. And it took me a long time to kind of figure these things out. On the flip side, for women, generally speaking, like I said, I think I said it before, the father becomes the most important male figure for the daughter, because that's who she generally models her partners after. So if your father is a healthy, strong, masculine man, she's generally going to be attracted to men who are similar to her father. She's generally going to look for men who are of that particular caliber. It's not a guarantee, but it's a higher likeliness that she will find someone similar, which is why, Keri, I asked you if your husband had something similar to what your father had. So now, if he is missing, I've seen it so many different times where young women who grew up without their fathers have terrible pickers. They have no idea who to choose when it comes to relationships. And they pick the bad boys. You know, they're kind of almost like cats running after shiny objects. You know, they run after the pretty guys. They run after this, they run after that. They're easily tricked by guys who are kind of shady. You know, they are very hopeful about someone who shows no prospect of being a future father or future partner. So they're very lost in how they choose men, and it's very impactful because if they choose the wrong guy and have the child with the wrong guy, it repeats the cycle. So that's kind of like a general breakdown as far as how I little things and the importance of the parental figure. Clifton, do you have anything to say? I know I just spoke a lot.
Well, I think part of what is difficult is that, you know, it's the classic saying of if you have, oh, what is it? I'm going to butcher it, but if you are if you're not a liberal when you're young, you have no heart, and if you're not a conservative when you're older, you have no brain. Part of the difficulty that we face today, and you know, this is one of the reasons that I don't cast myself as a conservative. I'm too much of a hedonist and a libertine, but I do see the value in those arguments. And part of the problem is that it's very difficult to sell the ideas of delayed gratification, self-control, discipline, impulse control to any young people. And I think, you know, and that's what, you know, when you have a different ideology or worldview that says love who you want, you know, F who you want, and with no abandon. And then you also, on top of that, have a vast technological apparatus where you're constantly exposed to sexually graphic material. I mean, I once described, yeah, I'm going to go there. I once described Tinder as Grubhub for pussy, and you know, but that's the kind of world that we live in now. That's the Pandora's box that's been opened. So how do you? And you know, and maybe I feel like I am seeing a backlash from younger people in terms of reacting to. They're saying how Gen X and millennials have sort of destroyed their lives, themselves, and everything else. And so, but it goes back down to this point of, you know, I think it's a great idea to encourage younger people to be a little bit less promiscuous. You know, I hope I'm not a hypocrite because, you know, if I were to tell a young woman to keep her knees closed, I would also tell a young man, look, don't chase women, chase your goals, chase your ambitions, improve yourself, and then you will attract the right kind of women. Hopefully we can sort of begin to put out more of these ideas, but do it in a way where it's not a bunch of, you know, old frumpy looking men in thick Coke bottle glasses and tweed suits or something who are saying you know, penning op-eds saying you need to do this in order to have a product. I mean, like, you know, it's just not cool to people. So yeah, you know, I'm talking around you know, mothers and fathers, but it really starts at the base relationship and how we relate to each other as members of the opposite sex, and just help encouraging young people to make better decisions. That's sort of where my mind is right now.
First of all, what is your problem with tweed suits and I'm just kidding. I just wanted to jump in here for a second and say something about, you're talking about women, and what you would tell them about, making better choices when it comes to sex. This is something I started thinking about a few years ago. Like, even if you're not personally conservative, or you're not a Christian, for example, who believes that you should wait until marriage because that's what the Bible directs you to do. Just look at the hormones that your body releases during sex. So one of those is oxytocin, which is like a bonding chemical. It increases emotions like trust and happiness and like contentment with a person. And anytime that you're engaging in sex with someone that you don't want to be emotionally bonded to, you're bonding yourself to them in a way emotionally. And so I know so many women who, I know this is anecdotal, but I know so many women who've gotten into bad relationships and struggled with having these feelings of trust and love and connectedness with someone who did not deserve it, and who logically they were like, it doesn't make any sense why I like this person. They're the so-called bad boy, for example, that you're mentioning, Adam, but I love them, but I'm in love with them and I can't help it. But I'm in love with them, but they're liars. I'm in love with them and I shouldn't trust them. And it's like, well, yeah, you just engaged in a process repeatedly sometimes, where you've caused your body to release these hormones that bond you to the person. No wonder you can't trust your emotions. So I started thinking about that, and I was like, what if some of these things in the Bible are just sort of like, hey, this is for your own good. Like, maybe don't release bonding chemicals with someone you don't want to be married to. Anyway.
Can I cut in on that?
No, that's yeah. Go ahead.
Excuse me, because it's really interesting to me because I feel like, sorry, I'm coughing. Hello, hi everybody. But it's funny because this recurring theme about religion keeps coming up in my conversations, and I wonder if I'm becoming a broken record by telling people that I'm an atheist. But so many of my conversations lately have centered around spirituality and religion, and it's funny to me because even though in terms of a modern sort of liberal, even progressive, I always use the term progressive in air quotes now, but a progressive sort of paradigm, we view these religious texts or doctrines as oppressive, as too limiting. They're not liberal enough. They're old. They're boring. They're outdated. But this is sort of it builds on. I mean, I'm responding to what Keri was saying, but it builds on this idea that I sort of happened upon a few years ago, which is that, okay, even if I personally don't accept this belief system, I do respect it as an attempt to solve a problem. That problem being the propensity of human beings to do horrible, wasteful, lecherous things. So I have a sort of respect for it in that way. But it's like, yeah, just like kind of you were alluding to, Keri. It's like, maybe it's not for nothing. Maybe they were on to something.
Yeah, I laugh at it now, but I kind of view it as some of these so-called rules. I used to look at the guidance, I guess, in the Bible, or the rules in the Bible, as restricting, and now I've started flipping that on its head and I've started thinking about each one of these so-called restrictions as, what if this is a boundary that's meant to increase my freedom, that's meant to like guide me in a better direction and help me make wise choices. So even if you don't believe in God, you could look at some of these guidelines and say, I see how that may have developed. I see how that may be a piece of wisdom that survived through generations. So, yeah, anyway, thanks for letting me go on that tangent. I was just like, as I'm getting more, I guess, as I said, conservative personally in the way I think I should live, I don't necessarily view that as a restrictive thing. I don't think it's like restricting my freedom. I feel so much more free now than I did when I was social justice hedonist. And by the way, Clifton, as a former hedonist, I'll tell you this: I once read when I first started like feeling that this sort of interest in God or curiosity about whether we had souls and stuff, I read this quote by St. Augustine, and it was something to the effect of, "Lord, please make me pure, but not quite yet." And that really resonated with me, because it was like, I want to be pure, but I still have a lot of my desires I want to live out first, right? And at the time I was like, oh, that's so me. And I finally got past that stage, though. And so who knows? Maybe one day you'll be the person who's like, as a former libertine and hedonist.
Yeah,
Anyway,
maybe.
maybe not, though.
That is a maybe.
Actually, I want to jump in on the because essentially what Keri was talking about is what they refer to as pair bonding. Release of hormones. Um, Part of the thing that I'm very concerned about is that we have lots of contraceptive options for women today, and it's because of that, it allows for women to have sex without the risk of getting pregnant, or a very extremely low risk of getting pregnant. Let's just say there's no foolproof one, but extremely low chance of getting pregnant while taking a contraceptive properly. So with that becomes a sexual liberation where women can choose to have sex or not far more frequently than they did in the past. And we have come to the point where we have a culture that almost in a way advocates for women to live their best life at a very young age, which translates into, most of the time, have sex as often as possible. um, just go for it. If you're out on vacation, you see some guy, he's hot, go for it. Why not? If there's some guy that you think is attractive and you got the signs, go for it. If that's what you feel like doing, just go for it. And from the aspect of pair bonding, I think it destroys their ability to bond with a man when they do reach an age that they feel like they do want to settle down, but they have a hard time actually doing so. Um, you know, I watch all different types of like content online, and sometimes I think to myself, for a lot of these women who reach the age, let's say, of 30, 31, 32, we're actually trying to have a serious relationship, marriage. And I never realized how many women get engaged and then break off the engagement. There would be women I would hear have 3 engagements and never got married. And I was, how is that possible? Like, you have 3 of them and never got married. And part of me thinks that it has something to do with it. They're kind of like burning through those hormones, almost like when a drug addict kind of burns through the endorphins. They kind of burn out the receptors. I know I'm not being
Oh gosh, no,
scientific
Adam,
on
I
it.
did that.
You did that?
Yes. Before I became Christian, I was dating this guy. Look, I'll tell you a personal story.
Oh.
I
Oh
was dating this
shit.
guy who it was an absolutely toxic relationship. If I look back on it now, I know why I was with him, because I truly hated myself, and I wanted a captor to keep me in hell where I thought I belonged. He was an alcoholic. I wanted to stop drinking. He told me repeatedly that I didn't have a problem. He did the kind of things, the opposite of what you would want someone to do. He didn't encourage good behaviors or good changes. He actively discouraged them. And, I think we've all read about, or maybe know about personally, people like this who want to keep you in a low place with them. And I did that. And I was in that relationship, and I was in that low place because of self-loathing. And I was in the dark, and I was trying to find my way out. And he asked me to marry him 3 times. I told him no until finally the 3rd time I gave up. I said, sure. But I had bonded with him. Like the whole thing I was talking about with oxytocin. I was having premarital sex. I didn't believe there was anything wrong with it at the time. And I was like, but I love this guy. And on paper, logically, there's no reason to love this person. It was like, wow, this person has repeatedly shown you who they are in terms of being a serial liar, a serial cheater, someone who has problems being honest, who can't be honest, and maybe doesn't set out maliciously to harm you, but doesn't care if they harm you.
Right.
And yet I had these feelings for this person. I had developed these emotional feelings for this person. And my self-delusion was so bad, I'll tell you, after I said yes to marry this guy, I had a nightmare one night that I had married him. And in the nightmare, it was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And I woke up in a cold sweat, so relieved that it was a nightmare. And then I seriously sat down the next day in my journal and I wrote about the nightmare. And I said, I wonder what it means. That's how deep my self-delusion was. But getting out of that it's a long story of how I got out of that and got out of that point of view. It had a lot to do with getting rid of resolving a lot of stuff in my childhood. That sounds cliche, but it really did. It had a lot to do with resolving stuff in my childhood, getting rid of self-hatred. I had to stop listening to that, what I would call Satan, that negative voice in your head. If you're not a believer, you can call it something else. I've read other, books like The Power of Now that talk about that negative voice, but I had to stop listening to that. And
I've named that voice Brandon.
Let's go. Get out of here, Brandon. Anyway, that's my personal story about that. But yeah, women do that. And I know friends who've done that. I know friends who are still doing that. And you can't push them to leave that kind of a relationship until they're ready. You want to be a supportive friend and kind of give them advice, but people, I think people, I've come to learn people make moves when they're ready and when they've dealt with things, and you can encourage them to deal with things, but you can't really push them until they've, I don't know, whatever that process is for each person of resolving that stuff in their past. And look, getting over your what is it? Okay, you were talking about, Adam, for example, women who've grown up without a father and the issues this might cause them in their relationships. Well, if I was talking to a woman like that, and if she had a pattern of dating these bad guys or getting into these bad relationships, I would ask, what's your identity? Because so many times people have their identity wrapped up in their past of what happened to them. My identity is I'm an abused child, or my identity is I didn't have a father, or my identity is this person, screwed me over this way, and then that becomes a pattern. No wonder you repeat those things, because that's how you view. That's who you view yourself as. That's a part of your story of yourself and your definition of yourself. Well, those things are not your identity. Those are just things that happen to you, and you can leave them in the past.
Right.
And they don't have to affect your current relationships, and you don't have to continually keep playing that out and trying to resolve that childhood trauma in your current relationships. You can say, okay, I figured out why I was doing that. I'm letting that go. It's not how I'm going to define my identity anymore. And then I think you'll see a change in I mean, I really do. I think you'll see a change in the kind of people you start surrounding yourself with. But that's just me rambling. I'll stop.
Yeah, I think that the example of women who consistently go in and out of relationships, like I was talking about, kind of burning out their pair bonding receptors, so to speak. Part of the other problems, they become very almost negative about relationships, almost relationship nihilistic. And they have a hard time, even when they want to, they have a hard time staying together with that one person. and they become very skeptical of men too. That's another like pattern. But it makes sense though, because I would imagine if you know, in a 10-year span had eight relationships and they all failed, you'd be real, you know, skeptical about men and whether relationships could happen. You know, I get it. In some ways, you know, there are women who are being promoted to do such a thing, to just jump in and out without having a real idea as to what kind of partner, as far as like their character, um, their potential, what their ambitions are, what they want to do with themselves, rather than just the superficial, you know, oh, he said this nice thing to me, or he has a nice car, or he's attractive, you know, all those things don't necessarily indicate, you know, a successful long-term relationship. Um, but Clifton, did you want to add anything?
Not particularly.
It's all good. Actually, I think because we're about an hour in, I was seeing if anybody wants to join the conversation. Oh, we already got somebody who wants to join. Hello, sir. Deuce.
Ooh, how are you fine folks doing?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Pretty good, pretty good. I saw the old
Much
chap
more has
Clifton was in
arrived.
here. I know. King hater himself. But of course, no, this is you know what, this is actually a great thing. I'm actually glad to see you guys using spoken media here currently on Twitter. I know this is pretty much a hellscape of censorship and curated narratives, but you know what? This is actually a pretty good place to be. So,
Yeah.
again, just kind of contributing to the, I guess, original topic. Again, you guys probably have taken a couple of turns, but I'm pretty much looking at the reason why I do everything that I do, and that's just these little chunklets that I call my kiddos. I actually posted a great little video of my little boy. He's 1 year old, and you know what? He's already well on his way to learning his alphabet. Like it's honestly amazing seeing these kids. But the one thing that I do realize is that fatherhood is a great way to just even the odds when it comes to having two parents that both have careers and that work. And you know, it's hard because kids really don't get the relative attention that they necessarily need. And you know, sometimes the mother doesn't have all the bandwidth or all the time to provide, and that's where the father should come in again, just to provide a little bit of structure and you know, allow the kid to get some experience bumping their heads every now and again without being absolutely coddled the way that a mother is basically hardwired to do. So,
Mhm.
you know, I'm just proud. I'm honestly proud to be a father. I've got 5 kids in the household, you know, and so it's a busy time for me, especially after I get off work and, you know, make my way home. I'm almost, but, you know, that's just a part of it. And honestly, I can imagine where I'd be without my dad, you know, for, again, a lot of his misgivings. He was a strict father, hard having us on our P's and Q's, but it paid off tremendously. But no, that was just kind of what I want to chime in on, really.
All right. Thank you. It sounds like you had a busy household, but I completely agree with you from the aspect of a father. I think I said the other day that the only thing that makes me actually cry is thinking about how proud I am of my son. You know, he's 16 years old. Um, you know, he's the better version of me, and I really believe that. And you know, I root for him to succeed in every which way possible. I'm always supportive of him. Um, you know, and it's interesting for me because, like I said, I didn't grow up with my father, but I remember when he was born, the first thing I thought to myself was, I'm just not going to be like my dad, which is really easy. I just had to be there. That was the bare minimum. But, I exceeded the bare minimum, and, I constantly do my best, and, waiting for the day where I could give him some like real life information, girls and stuff like that. Actually, Clifton, you said something earlier about chasing girls and stuff. I told him, chase your purpose, the women will follow. Don't worry about women. They'll be there. They'll always be there. Make yourself a better man, and you'll be good. So I thank you for sharing your perspective as a father, and what you went through. Growing up with your father who was more steadfast.
Right. Yeah, it's you know what? That's actually going to be a journey once you get into the whole talk with women, and it's. I know I don't want to hog too much time, but I can definitely tell you that there's going to be some times where your kids are going to probably mess up, and I think approaching that conversation, the birds and the bees and all of that, that's really going to be somewhere where I think we can diverge a little bit from possibly the more prudish and maybe repressive approach that our parents have taken in the past, and be a little bit more open, because there are just forces at work that are basically trying to indoctrinate your kids into the sexual culture before you even have a chance to even get to and talk to them. So,
Yeah.
but no, definitely. Thank you guys for having me for a little.
Yeah,
thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, man. Have a good one.
Anybody else? Let's see. Coffee here. I'll add you here real quick. All right, you should be able to speak. You can unmute yourself. Coffee. There you go.
Hey, thanks. So I just want to preface this by saying that I'm not a father myself yet. Hopefully next year. So looking forward to that. Going to be exciting times. But I volunteered with several youth organizations for a long time now, at least 12 years. And I moved 2 cities. The one city that I was in previously was a more, I'm going to say, affluent type city. And I found that the kids there worked really, really well with the instructors. They were very attentive, and there was very minimal disruptions overall. But then I moved to a city that's has a very high incarceration rate, and I noticed that the kids that we worked with there was a lot more emotional problems, developmental problems overall, and they're the like I'd never encountered before in the program a young woman that was pregnant in the program until I moved to this one city. And I would talk to them, and I would say, what's going on? Well, I'm going to the jail this weekend to visit my dad. Or the worker's going to bring me this week to visit my mom, things like that. And I mean, we had to deal with disclosures of all sorts that have had to go to court and things like that, and things that I'd never encountered before. Was a bit of a shock for me overall. But I guess it's completely anecdotal to say this, but I would say that the families that have fathers in the family seem to do better. And again, that's just completely anecdotal from what I've seen through volunteering with youth-based organizations for a long time. And it seemed to be the best outcomes is when there was both a father and a mother figure in the household. So again, just completely anecdotal, just something that I noticed. It's sad because like these are really, really good kids, and it just seems like they've been dealt a pretty bad hand in life, and especially I would say for the boys there is they have this thing where they want your approval so badly. So when you're teaching them skills, they want to do it properly all the time. And if they don't do the skills properly, they're very, very discouraged. And sometimes if you say, okay, well, you didn't do it properly, instantly they want to give up, or they kind of throw a bit of a tantrum over it. And I just got to say, hey, it's okay. We're going to show you how it's done, and we're going to give you a chance to practice. But these kids, I just feel awful for them, because a lot of them don't seem to have a lot going for them in life. And we've lost a few kids to they've ended up joining gangs. And you'll show up on the night that everyone meets, and one of the other kids will say, hey, did you see the news website so and so is on the most wanted list? Things like that.
Wow.
And it's just stuff that I'd never seen when I was at this more affluent city with more, what I would say, stable family kind of home environment overall. So that's all I had to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. Man, I know he said it's anecdotal, but I think that the statistics would back this up. With the boys who need that male approval, uh, like, it does not surprise me whatsoever. Um, you know, being, especially like for kids, there are plenty of times where kids can be insecure about something, and it's the job of, I mean, both parents, yes, but I think it's more impactful for young men. It's the father to encourage them, to say it's okay, to keep them going, to build up their confidence, to not make them insecure, to kind of cut off that insecurity at the head, and keep them balanced as far as how they view themselves, how they see life, how they see themselves, what they're capable of doing. Um, I'll just, this is anecdotal. I'll use my son, for example. My son, after high school, wants to go to Japan. He wants to do animation. And would my son have this idea to do something like that if I wasn't in his life? Would he think that he has the confidence to get on a plane, move to a whole other country, learn another language, get into the most competitive animation market in the world, and possibly do well? Would he be able to have that confidence without me? And I don't know. This is an impossible question, because thankfully I am here, and I encourage him. And I also keep it real with him. And I tell him, you may fail. It's a possibility, but this doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. I believe in you. I think you're good. You can work harder. You can be even better. Go out there and do the best that you can. And, he has a goal in mind. And he has that goal in mind because he believes he can do it. And I've reassured him that he can do it. So he's learning Japanese on his own. He's doing as much as he can right now, and he's 16, and he's a sophomore. So he's doing the work, and he's been doing some of the work since last year. So I'm keeping him focused. I'm building up his confidence, and I don't think he has any doubts that he'll be able to do to accomplish such a big feat, or to at least attempt it, because a lot of people don't try to reach for things because they're fearful of failing. So I thank you for sharing your perspective. James, did you want to?
Yeah, can everybody hear me? This is my first time on one of these.
Yep.
Cool. So I'll go straight to the real here. I'm 39 and I've got 3 kids. They're all girls. They're 12, 9, and 5. And I think a lot of fatherhood conversations tend to gravitate towards what will fathers do for their sons. So just a gentle reminder, there are girls out there that need us. My girls in particular really needed me at one point, because when I was 32, my first wife passed away unexpectedly of a heart attack without warning.
Oh, wow.
So I was left with my daughters age 5 and 2 for a short period before I met my now wife. 6 months later, we got married. She adopted the older 2, we had a child of our own, and she has high expectations of me as a father because she gave up a lot.
Mhm.
This is an independent woman who was an iron woman. She's a successful corporate accountant, a yoga instructor, and totally self-sufficient. We got married, and she said she was miserable because she was never seeing her newly adopted 6 and 3-year-old daughters. And I said, "Why are you working still?" She said, "Well, money." And I was like, "You actually don't need that." And she walked away and put that entire responsibility on me. And I'm
Mhm.
used to it. I've been doing it this way the whole time. But the best way for a father to support his daughters is to love their mother. I've done this successfully with 2 different mothers. And it's been a journey, man. Like, all of this is a big journey. We've been through some real shit in this house. And
Yeah.
without fathers, there is no chance for daughters. So don't sleep on girl dads. We're out here. Thanks.
Absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, I know there's, because I'm a guy, and I talk more about the same sex, the father to the son. Absolutely. The father is extremely important for the young women, for the same type of thing, for confidence. I've seen a lot of women who didn't have their father, and I look at them and they're very insecure. Uh, though it's anecdotal, I see certain patterns when I women who have very similar upbringings and they have very similar traits or behavioral patterns. Um, so absolutely, I'll be the first one to acknowledge that men like yourself are extremely important within the family. Um, Keri, Clifton, do you have anything to add?
I would just say I love that, Jason. And also, I mean, for women too, the best thing you can do for your kids is to love their father. And, when we talk about how on average most kids do better with both parents in the home, of course, that doesn't mean if you're in a dysfunctional home or an abusive home. And so I think people need to root out whatever their issues are that cause dysfunction and abuse. If you have kids, it's like what Clifton was saying, that should be the number one priority in your life, is putting those kids first and putting their needs ahead of your own, and giving them a good example of what a healthy family and a healthy relationship, what that looks like. So
Oh yeah, I mean that was pretty much what I was going to say at the very end. I knew James would have some fire to spit. Um, but yeah, I think one of the crucial things to hit on is that you're sort of killing 2 birds with 1 stone in terms of responding to what James was saying about loving the mother, because you're not only helping to sustain that other person, but you're also modeling for the kids, what a positive mother-father relationship could be, the warts and all, which I think is a great concept. I do have to go in a few more minutes, but I've invited inside Writers Against Woke Ideology. I think you know where he stands. So I presume that they have something to add. Oh, and Adam Kriegler just joined us. Holy crap! Hello, Adam.
What's up, Adam? Clifton, I understand. I know you're under the weather. If you have to go, that's perfectly fine. I appreciate you being on as long as you were, and we'll talk soon. I appreciate
bye,
it.
Clifton.
Alrighty, I'll listen in for a few more, but just so I don't do what's it called, the Irish exit.
That's my favorite exit of all the exits.
It's the most effective. It just gets you going. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stick around for a little bit.
Okay. Writers, you wanna add your 2 cents?
Hi, I'm actually Alex. Keri knows me.
Oh, hey.
Yep, it's me. So I I grew up with a great dad and with two parents who were best friends and really loved each other. And I knew from my friends just how lucky I was in that regard. And I as an adult, it's been, I'm in my 30s now, and I've noticed this absolute cultural assault on fathers. And every single time I think about how wonderful my dad was. Now, I lost him when I was in college, unfortunately. But but this goes far back because I was from his third marriage. His first marriage, he had two kids with, and he got divorced, not by his choice. And he didn't get to be a part of those kids' lives, and I could tell it always bothered him, and it did have a great effect on the amount of success, I would say, that those other girls had in their adult lives, and I realized that I said this today, that my first novel is about how badly a family fares when there is no father figure at all. And and especially like for girls, it can be damaging in a completely different way. And I've noticed that the cultural assault on fatherhood, it's hitting all forms of art. Like I read a lot of novels today, and literary novels, and they don't care about dads. They push an idea that they don't matter. And I think it's very dangerous. I think it's not good for a society, and it's not good for an individual. I understand that to some extent you want to make sure that families that have no choice aren't seen as bad necessarily. If someone died, you can't really do anything about that, except hope you find love again. But, when it comes to this idea that we shouldn't care at all whether or not both parents are in the home, I think it's just opening the door to too many psychological issues.
No, absolutely. I don't mean to veer this to race or per se, but in my book, Black Victim, Black Victor, I am primarily talking about Black Americans and from a cultural standpoint, how we view fathers, and the lack of an importance of having that father there. And I'm saying it coincides with, in many ways, the decline of Black Americans as far as reaching the heights that we thought they could reach, especially post civil rights. There's been a notable decline. If we look at incarceration rates, pre-civil rights, they were on par with the population. But if we look post-civil rights, or look at today, it's disproportionate. It's very disproportionate. It's a very noticeable difference between the two. And the most glaring, obvious thing is the role of fathers. And then it boils down to the psychological aspect of not having the father in the home for the boys and the girls, and what kind of effect that has. But the problem is that it's become culturally normal. And, I use Black Americans, I'm Black, but I use Black Americans almost as a case study, because it's increasing throughout American society in general, for white Americans, for Hispanic, you name it. Because socially it's become more acceptable. We don't shame single parents. We don't ask questions as to why are you carrying these children by yourself? What did you do? Right? We say, go ahead. You're a strong, independent woman. We encourage bad behavior. And granted, not every woman who is, a single mother necessarily did something to contribute to that, like wholeheartedly, but we're all responsible for the outcomes that we have in our life. So I put onus on the man and the woman, from the woman's perspective, choosing the right kind of man by finding the right kind of characteristics. From the male's perspective, deciding where you're placing your seed to impregnate a woman, because you're ultimately going to be responsible for the outcome too. But when we have a culture that says it's perfectly fine, you don't need a man, you're strong and independent, and we reduce men to just being check earners or child support payments, I think it does a huge disservice to the qualities that you experience as a young woman growing up with your father, and how much it meant to you to have your father in your life. Because, you know, reducing men to checks is almost like saying that your childhood with your father ultimately meant as much as what you got for Christmas. You know, and you can get children, anything. Little kids, you can give them just about anything, and they'll be happy just to get something. You know, and we always put like this high value on money and what you can buy your kids. Kids care way more about the times that they spent. I know people who grew up poor who reminisce about the poverty that they lived in, but they had such a good time with their family. So like the memories that you build and the importance of having your family together exceed money wholeheartedly. And I know we've become more materialistic as a country, but I wish we put more value on the family and sacrificing for the family instead of being selfish and thinking that people are just money, or specifically men are just money, and they don't offer much else.
Or not even that they're money, just that they're sperm donors. I mean, did you see the recent White House released this thing called the Life of Linda, which is supposed to promote Biden's Build Back Better agenda, and it's just a single mom, Linda, and it's basically talking about how at every stage of her child's life, the government is there to help her. It's sort of like it's like propaganda. It never even mentions the dad. Like, where is he? It doesn't matter. It's normalizing single motherhood. And I think this goes back to this idea that we're talking about, where we've conflated the idea of not attacking single mothers means that you can't talk about how the ideal is to have both parents in the home. And that's just not true.
I think it's partially a difference between normalizing and enabling. Like, we're enabling bad behavior. We're not saying that, it's okay if things ended up a little different in some cases. That should be acceptable. There should be acceptable outliers. But to say that you're enabling everyone to make bad decisions,
and incentivizing it, you're giving incentives.
Yeah. Incentivizing is enabling. So I think that's a big part of it, is that it's like, I can understand that people can be different, but I don't want people to enable bad behavior, and especially not at such a high level. It's like too far.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The enabling part is important to distinguish. You're right. I've said to myself, I think in America, if we didn't have a child support system, I think men and women would move they'd move very differently in life. They'd be real careful about what they did. If they knew for sure that the government was going to come in and take somebody's money from someone else's account to help support them. And I think in many ways, this is why I've become more libertarian, because I see how, like you said, Keri, the government's like, don't worry, we're always going to be here to uplift you. And I'm looking at the result of the government always being there to uplift you. It leaves people to never try to lift themselves up when they're more than capable of doing so. We all know people who'd rather get a check from the government. Actually, I'll tell you this. I work with a company that deals with employing lots of people, and they're having trouble getting people jobs, not because there aren't jobs, but because the existence of the government giving bonus money to stay home during the pandemic is keeping people from coming to work. So we're actually having the opposite issue that we thought we were going to have because of the pandemic. We thought the jobs were going to start to go away, because of the pandemic, but it's the opposite. There's help wanted signs everywhere. And that's because the high amount of government involvement and the enabling of the government to pay for people to stay home. You pay them extra money to stay home, they're going to stay home. So I don't want to rant too much about the government, but Keri, did you did you want to say something?
No, I agree with that. Let's have someone else talk.
Okay. Alex, thank you for contributing.
Thank you. I'm
Hey,
actually
it's
going
good
to
to see
go,
you back
but it
on
was.
Twitter.
Oh, I know. I'm
Karma
not here
fan,
much.
problem maker.
I know. All right. Well, I really appreciated this discussion. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And I think we'll go to Lynn real quick. Keri, I don't want to take too much of your time. So let's go to Lynn here.
Our society over the last 23 years as an adult degrading, and it's been like a deliberate attempt to erode people's ability to have good, solid, secure relationships with one another, and as well as an erosion of the middle class. So as the white population has been hit, the black population got hit first with the deindustrialization of North America and sending good, secure jobs, like not careers, but jobs overseas. What do you do when you can't feed a family? What do you do? And now it's hitting the white folks, and we're seeing a lot more women going to school and rising above our station. Like my dad's a steelworker, my mom's a receptionist, so I went through podiatry school. But then by the time I was done school, I was so far in debt, there was no man around who could have paid my student loans, and there was no way I could afford to take a mat leave and even consider having children. And I won't do it alone because I was raised by a good father, and he put forward a good example for me. And the other thing is, I won't accept a man child. I watched my sister married to a man who acts like he's 12 years old and pitches temper tantrums. And we have, how do you can't talk yourself into good self-esteem, and self-esteem has been eroded by our cultural products, this consumer culture, and we make you feel bad about yourself and how you look, and when you're getting older, your wrinkles, and you can't talk yourself into better self-esteem. Most people can't afford therapy, and we've cut ourselves off from all of the traditional, like drum ceremonies, dances, chanting, South American plant medicine, the African Witty ceremonies, sweat lodges. We don't have good mental health to even have good pair bonds. And then everybody, like so many people are so on the edge financially, so precarious. It's so multifactorial, and it's more than just individuals. And even just looking at his father, a chunk of shale came off a mine shaft, knocked the teeth out of his head and scrambled his brains. And so his older siblings had a good father, and my father had an abusive father, and my father doesn't know his worth either. He did better for us than he had done for him. But there's so many people, as things are eroding, as people are getting poorer in the middle class, and as the middle class is disappearing, more people are turning to alcohol, more people are turning to drugs, and they can't give a good example for their kids because it's just, they're so close to the edge.
Lynn, you came in hot, you came in spitting fire. I think the thing I will add, I don't disagree with what you're saying. The thing I would add is I think people need to focus more on what they can control. Because there's a lot of things that happen within our society that we have no control over. No matter how hard we want things to be, we have no control over it. And certain things are inevitable. Certain things rest in other people's hands. But there are definitely things that we can control. And for this particular conversation where we're talking about fathers and procreating, each one of us has the ability to control this aspect of it. the decision to choose to have sex with someone, or to, at bare minimum, unprotected sex with someone, or protected sex. So, these are very personal decisions that people make. I think for myself, I wish we would advocate that these are personal decisions and these are very impactful decisions. And I think, and this is just my view of it is that we've downgraded the importance of proper mate selection, or of how important sex actually is. We kind of say, I need a release, let me go have some sex. But like Keri was talking about before, the pair bonding aspect is important, especially for women.
Yes.
This is a really big thing. And so just going out and having sex with people leads you down the path where you're not going to be able to kind of come back from. Once you have that kid, that's it. But these are all very controllable things. And I think a lot of times people who are in unfortunate circumstances act like they just woke up one day in an unfortunate circumstance. There are a series of decisions that we all make. Good decisions, bad decisions. Some of us wake up, behind other people. Some of us ahead of other people. That's life. But we're all capable of making very particular decisions. And it's how we handle those decisions and how we move forward in life is what determines, our future outcomes. So if we can catch young people, I think Clifton was talking about this before. How do we encourage young people to understand the importance of not just sleeping with random people, or the importance of saying that, safe sex is extremely important, and here's why. Mate selection is important. Try not to sleep with too many people. At the very least, try not to sleep with too many people. That sounds like a reasonable request. So I think, not to rant too much, but I think if we can focus more on what we can control, I think that'll make people far more sane. Because there's always going to be things that are unfortunate happening somewhere in the world, things that we can't control, the government doing something that we don't have much control over. For the vast majority of us, we get one vote. That's it. And we don't have any direct action to whatever happens in the world. So, hold on to what you can control, is what I would say.
I think those of you who are blessed with children and raising children, keep your children away from toxic media products so that they have the self-esteem to hold out for what they deserve in a relationship. And so that they don't have to go down the path that Keri, you had to go down thinking you didn't deserve it. If we had that within ourselves to hold out for better for what we deserve, we'd hold up for better in jobs, we hold up for better in relationships, and this whole world would be a whole lot of a better place if people demanded what we deserve.
Absolutely. Keri, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think parents need to have a better control over, or at least idea of what kind of media their kids are consuming. Just like earlier we were talking about, they need to be aware of what their kids are learning at school and what belief system they're being given at that school. And but I think there's something you were saying, Adam, about how do we teach young people to be concerned about some of these things. And I think that, look, nobody likes to be conned. Nobody likes to be controlled, or most people don't. I guess this past year and a half has changed my opinion on that a little bit. But but it used to be that, young people were reacting to sort of the fundamentalist religious right trying to control their decisions and that's what I was reacting to, was this idea of an overbearing, I guess what Jordan Peterson or someone might call the archetypal overbearing father and restrictive father and authoritarian father. And so I was reacting to that. And it was sort of, no one's going to tell me how to live my life and what decisions I can make. And I don't have to be a homemaker, and I don't have to have kids. And that's what a lot of the social justice part, the feminist part of the social justice movement, that's what they preach. They preach that basically you need to embrace hedonism and throw off all boundaries, and that all of these ideas about all of these boundaries are basically restrictions on your freedom, right? And
Right.
I think what we're seeing now is that sort of controlling authoritarianism and that Puritanism is coming from the left. And if we can talk to kids about, like, tap into that feeling of not wanting to be controlled and not wanting to be conned, and sort of show kids that, like, look, they want you to ruin yourself. I truly believe this. Like, the culture where it's at right now, look at the past year and a half. They did not close liquor stores. Okay, they didn't close fast food restaurants. They closed gyms. They closed churches. Like, they're
Yeah.
perfectly happy for you to become fat and drunk and knock yourself out and sit on the couch and consume Netflix and just be a happy, content little consumer, an easily controllable consumer. And so if we can point that out, and I think there have been some good memes that have kind of, this whole idea of if you want to rebel these days, kids, like get in a monogamous relationship. Like, you know what I mean? like if you want to say F the system, then, maybe go to church and read the Bible and see what it has to say about the guidelines for the best way to live your life. And that's true. That's actually to being a rebel today is thinking about some of these things and thinking about the best way to live your life, because the culture is telling you, have sex with as many people as possible, choose what gender you are, stay drunk and stoned all the time, consume as much as you can, and put yourself first above anything else, worship yourself and the government, and basically kind of knock yourself out at the end of each day with your drug of choice or your addiction of choice. So, just kind of like coast through life and not really live it. And if you want to rebel against that, get conscious. Like, start thinking about your choices. Start thinking about how you're living. And yeah, I don't know. It's me rambling again, but there you go.
You know what I was thinking? I was thinking, like, imagine in that world that we're talking about, like, Penthouse is filled with stories from married women talking about having sex with their husbands.
Yeah.
Just like trying to make monogamy sound hot.
Yeah, it's totally, hey, it's that less is more thing, actually. I'll tell you what. Here, let me give you an example in popular culture. So one of my gig jobs now, I listen, I won't tell the job just because I don't know, people might try to get me fired from it and whatever. But in this job, I listen to a lot of music that young people choose. And so I'm now, like, being exposed to all this young people's music. I sound like an old lady, which I am. And a lot of the music is just terrible. It's like, yeah, it's about sex, but there's no creativity there. It's just so boring. It's like, at least, in the 1920s, and if you look at blues and stuff, like, they would sing about sex, but they used creativity. They used euphemisms. They were clever. It would be like, put a little sugar in my bowl and put your hot dog in my bun. And nowadays music is literally like, put this body part in this body part. I'm like, that's so boring. Like, you're not using any creativity whatsoever. It's not edgy. It's edgier to me if you can sing about sex and not be so explicit with the words, like, show a little creativity. That's edgy. Does that make sense, or am I just kind of out there with that tangent?
No, I hear what you're saying. I hear you. Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate you contributing here.
I think one of the things that's really been heartening lately is how much more recognition there is for evolutionary psychology and pair bonding. I did this as a minor, and it was basically unheard of when I was learning these things. And a lot of this mate selection and how we look at partners and why we did what we did in the environment of evolutionary adaptedness. You needed two, one to hunt, one to protect, and hunter gathering. If that was more prominent in our culture and more prominent in our children's educations, they might see that some of these ideas that came from, you know, like it's not just coming from religion. These two overlap so greatly in the recommendations we have from religion, as well as the theories on why we choose who we choose and why we act the way we act. So hopefully that's
Right.
going to be a good vehicle for change, understanding that evolutionary psychology piece.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And thank you for chiming in. We're going to do one last one. Wyatt was patient enough, so I'm going to add him here. Hello, Wyatt.
Hey, how are you? Can you hear me?
Doing
Okay,
well.
cool.
Yes,
Awesome,
yes, we
awesome.
can.
Yeah, no, what Lynn, I believe what she said at the everything that she said was absolutely on point. As you said, fire, but towards what she was saying at the end, I think that is it's what woke me up to everything really, is understanding evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology. Um, I came from I'm relatively young. 25 years of age currently. I just had a birthday. And
Happy birthday.
thank you very much. My my father, he always helped me out if I ever needed, if I really needed anything. He's bailed me out of some pretty bad situations, but um, he was largely uh, absent, like silent parent. It was my parents were together. They shouldn't have been. It was a very emotionally abusive. He did not. He was not a stoic man, and so he didn't teach me anything as consequence. He didn't give me any insight or knowledge to the world. I kind of had to fend for myself, and that resulted in me uh, growing up 2011 through in my high school years through college around uh, 18, 19 in this new tech environment that we have on Twitter and Instagram, with all this stuff just being beamed at me. And I didn't follow lovely people such as yourselves. So I was kind of in the pop culture hole. And what they were beaming at me was really this anti pretty much anti it's nonconformity, but it's anti society essentially. Getting rid of the family structure, getting rid of anti-capitalism, everything that our society runs on, and just demonizing these things to the point where I was absolutely convinced that men could behave like such as women, and women could behave such as men, and this was completely good for society and normal, and you should cheer this on, and you shouldn't ever degrade anybody for behaving any type of way, regardless of their gender or sexuality. Never should you ever do that. But as Lynn was saying, there are reasons for these realities that we have, and you can look in the animal kingdom. Uh, and you see these things mirrored in humans. Our society is founded upon thousands and thousands and thousands of, hundreds of thousands of years of this evolution. And so these things didn't just prop up out of nowhere. These things aren't just, what do they say, social constructs. To some extent, they
Mhm.
are. And it is important to understand that. But we really are getting rid of masculinity in society today, and that breeds weak men. And what do weak men do? They try to control, they tyrannize, and then we're telling women to just have sex with whoever. And so that also, as consequence, doesn't give the men any incentive to be stoic men, to strive for anything. And that's why you see a bunch of children, like, grown adult 30-year-old men that behave as boys. People aren't growing up, and it's destroying the fabric of society. So I think it's very important what you guys are talking about, and everything that everybody has said. I kind of caught the tail end, but I agree with everything, and it's pretty disheartening, I would say. So that's all.
Absolutely. Keri, I'll let you. You want to step in first?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm very encouraged to hear from you, Wyatt. Hear from someone younger who's thinking about these things, and I keep hearing that Generation Z is maybe rebelling against some of the ideology that I was a part of, and that the millennials were a part in bringing in this sort of this reimagined Marxism that's based around identity rather than around class. And so, yeah, I think this attack on the family. There's people who are a lot smarter than me that could trace the Marxist origins and talk about why it's really heated up now with this new identity based Marxism becoming so popular. But I think that there's really something there, and if you look at organizations like Black Lives Matter, which became really mainstream in the past year, and their very open hostility towards the nuclear family.
Right, right.
There's a lot going on here beneath the surface that most young people, I guess, or I would assume, are not paying attention to. And so, I don't know, I think it's really encouraging that you're looking at all this stuff.
I try to speak out
Absolutely.
when I can.
I
Sorry.
agree as well.
Yeah, didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry. You
Oh,
know, it is disheartening. Most young people my age, I have a very small circle of friends that are on board with this, and I've ended up converting a few people. There was actually I'm from a small city. It's not very big, but I ended up converting a Black Lives Matter organizer into like understanding how this really isn't about taking care of Black people. This isn't really, you know, all these movements aren't really about these things. They're about gaining power in order to implement governmental structures that they believe, or that they tell the people it'll benefit these groups, but it's really just a power grab. And I know that a lot of these people genuinely do believe these things, and that's why it's so disheartening, because it's kind of it's like a hypnosis over these people, and they're so well-meaning. I was the same way. I was completely on board with all of this stuff, pretty militantly, until I ended up, watching other people's videos, or, watching some content on YouTube and reading books about it. And I was like, wow, they told me that these people were bad and evil, and like everything that they're saying makes complete sense. And they're not being, asshole. They're not being rude about any of it. Some people might come off a little bit aggressive, but even then, I don't know. It's a battle that's being fought right now, and I think that there is ground being gained, but I'm not sure what the outcome is. I'm actually curious as to what you guys think about that. I would assume it isn't nihilistic all the way through, because you're having these conversations right now. So, but yeah, what do you think?
Well,
Yeah.
Wyatt, I'm going to be the weirdo square now. I'll be the weirdo Christian. but I have a lot of I think I know that things are going to end up in a positive place because of my belief in a creator and my belief in the Bible. And I kind of think that here's something I will say about that, though. I'm a pretty new Christian, and I have encountered recently some Christians who seem to be of the opinion that just because you might believe, or we believe, that God has a plan, that then it's okay to sit on our ass and not do anything during this culture war that's unfolding. And I don't think that's right. I think God wants us, God wants to work within us, through us as Christians. So if you're a Christian, maybe this will resonate with you. If you're an atheist, forgive me, I'm going to talk about God for like 1 minute. but I don't think God wants us to sit back on our hands and just wait for him to do something. And I've also seen online recently, even I saw an atheist who's pushing back against woke ideology, who was sort of saying, I need some advice on how to get out of my depression about the state of the world and where things are headed. but I don't want any advice from Christians. I don't want any Christians to tell me to pray and yeah, and they said this, and they were like, and it's for an atheist, it doesn't really help me. And also, if I did believe in God, I'd be really angry at him for not doing anything right now. And I was sort of reading that. I didn't reply because they said they didn't want any advice from me, but but also because that's not the way we view God. Like, that's not the way I view God. God's not sitting on his ass. God is wanting you to get off your ass so he can work through you. Like, that's the way I view it. And so I guess I'm just talking to the believers right now, but I believe that we are called, as God's creation, to maintain culture. If you go back to the Genesis story, God put man in the garden of Eden, and God created man as a gardener. We're here to rule over his creation, and we're supposed to be influencers of culture. And so there's a certain amount, I think, of retreat that Christians have been doing, where they're just sort of like, I'm just going to retreat and let this unfold, and God has a plan, and I'm not going to get involved in trying to shape the culture. And I think that's wrong. I think that's cowardly. I think you should be putting yourself in situations, even when you're going to be the embarrassing square weirdo like I am right now. Like, go ahead, say what you believe. Say what you believe, and be a part of this culture war. And because there are kids out there, like I said earlier when we were talking about parents and knowing what their kids are learning at school, in the same way that, like, if you don't give your kids a belief system, somebody else will. or the government will. If you don't give your kids a belief system and the one that you think is the best,
absolutely.
Like, it's the same way with speaking up in culture. If you don't put your ideas out there and say, this is the best way for living, and here's why I think this, and here's how it's worked for me, well, you're denying people the ability to hear, something that's winning for you. I mean, Jesus turned my life around. I know that sounds cliche to non-believers and what everybody did. So if I don't talk about that, then I'm being lazy and I'm sitting on my butt and I'm robbing people of the opportunity of knowing what helped me. And when I hear somebody say, I need help, but I don't want to hear from Christians and I don't want to hear about anything about God or about prayer, it kind of makes me think of like, hey, I'm dying of thirst in the desert, but don't give me any water. I just really don't want any water. So I'm like, okay, that's my boring square comment of the night. There we go.
Thank you, Keri. All right, so I had a few things to kind of throw in, because you were talking about originally how that this ideology kind of disregards everything that was done previously. Like you said, we have thousands of years of human history, and all of those things were quote unquote social constructs. I have this whole thing where I really hate how we disregard the past, we disregard traditions, we disregard all these things as just quote unquote as being like quote unquote old fashioned. Like they don't mean anything. As if people like for example, our grandparents were just barely above Neanderthals apparently. And they hold no value. They had no real lessons. They just did things because that's how they were supposed to do things. And I think that's a really huge disservice to not really understanding the past. We oversimplify when we try to find some sort of negative aspects of the past and how people lived. And I think part of it, I actually wrote an article about this. I think part of the reason why we have this high ego about traditions in the past and all these different things is because of technology. Because we are communicating right now, everybody's in different parts of the country, and we're communicating as if we're standing next to each other through basically supercomputers that can go in our pocket. We think that we are more advanced, but the reality is we just know how to use the tools. That's it. I agree. We are no different than the people that existed 80 years ago, 100 years ago. We're still human beings.
No, I think
if we were to swap places,
I think we're actually we're not as wise as those people.
It's a good point.
Right. Right. From a whole aspect, yes. I think we are more deficient in certain ways that should be more naturally given to us. Like, how do we communicate with each
I
other?
would
Like,
I would say
yeah,
specifically the younger population, this rings extremely true for, because I mean the only reason we are in the position we are in today with the luxury that we have is because of the thousands of years of toiled labor by our ancestors and their ancestors. And so to just pretend like the only thing, all this stuff is the only thing, just the material, and that there wasn't any insights that they had that could be on par with the technology that we have, but we just disregard it completely. Especially or the younger crowd. I mean, even the older crowd's they're falling into this too. Anybody who has the tendency for just heightened empathy and a disregard for authoritarian tendencies. But there's just, I don't know how you could look at all the stuff we have today and say, well, evidently we all know that this didn't just happen overnight. This has been built upon
right,
society for, like I said, forever. And then just to just pretend like the brain labor that they created, the writings, the works, all of the intellectual gifts that these people that built our society had, just throw them away. What sense does that make? It doesn't even. There's no sense making in that at all. It's ridiculous.
right. No, absolutely. It's everything comes in stages within life, or if we want to talk about our society, everything has come in stages. We didn't just one day invent the microprocessor, which revolutionized the world in so many different ways. It was a process of even coming to this point. And I think in many ways, it kind of represents how young people see like how their careers are supposed to be, like going to college, for example. You come out of college, you're supposed to make 80 grand a year, right?
Yeah.
And then,
Right.
and then when they come out of college and they got to work at Starbucks and they have to start from the bottom, just like everybody else, they're dismayed because they legitimize taking out $80,000 worth of student
Mm-hmm.
loan debt because they're going to come out making $80,000 and
Mm-hmm.
they'll pay it back in no time. And that's not the reality. It was never the reality. And they think everything is supposed to become
Mm-hmm.
instantaneous. And the reality is, no matter who you are, you always have to work for what you get. The most successful people understand delayed gratification.
Right.
And that is something that once you understand that there is pain and strife and failure when it comes to success, then you'll be a whole lot understanding as to why you're going through the pain and strife and the failures. It's part of the process for a lot of
Excuse
people
me,
if you want to
Adam.
become
I
successful.
believe that the
Yeah.
Smithsonian said that delayed gratification is a function of whiteness.
That's funny. I saw that too. Yeah, crazy. That's absolutely crazy that it's gotten into the institutions I mean, that's not the only case of this happening. I'm sure, I know you guys have seen it all over the place. There's a few accounts that are pretty prominent in documenting all of this, but it's this ideology and it is ideology. It's just what it is. It has gotten so deep into not only the brains of the people in society, but into the systems of our society, to the point where we're openly having discussion right now about indoctrinating our children. Is it okay or not? Like, it is so crazy, and it's almost unfathomable that this is where we are. I haven't been like cognizant for a very long time. I feel like I was extremely stupid all the way until like 3 years ago, but like it's just I know that it wasn't like this beforehand. Like, I hear people talk about how much everything has changed and how fast it's happened, and all this racial
Yeah.
tensions. It wasn't. It really, after George Floyd, it really popped off, and it's just been like exponential growth after that. So it's something happened, and it's really crazy.
You started paying attention a lot earlier in your life than I did. I'll say that, because I was pushing this belief system, the social justice stuff for 20 years, well, until my mid to late 30s. And
What
so
changed
again,
you? What woke you up to it?
well, I've told that story before. I don't want to bore people who already know it, but
Okay.
you can check out. I did an interview on trigonometry. That's probably that one, or the one I did with Zuby is probably the best one. But it was a long process, and it was like an emotional thing. It wasn't anybody giving me the right facts. You know, you can't really change most people's minds with facts. It's good to have you need to have the facts. You want to be speaking truth, but in order to get them to open their mind to what you're saying, you have to talk to their emotion, is the way I would put it. You have to present a story. You have to be here's a great example. I see a lot of people on the right argue things like minimum wage, their opinion on minimum wage, by giving a lot of facts. When I see people on the left talk about minimum wage by telling you a story, and they say, this is Linda. She works 3 jobs, and these are her kids, and this is why we believe minimum wage should be blah blah blah. You know, and they're telling you an emotional story that represents what opinion or what argument they want to make, that represents the opinion they want you to come away with. And the right tends to be more like, well, if I just give you this list of statistics, then you'll naturally arrive at my opinion. No, nobody wants to read your statistics. Most people don't. They want to hear the story first. There's a book I read called Love Your Enemies, and in that book, he's basically talking about bridging this political divide, this polarization that's been happening for the past few years in our country, and I think he gets a lot right. He also has some big blind spots, I think, about the left in that book. But one of the things he talks about is telling a story, and he draws from his experience having worked for nonprofits and having to do pitches to get people to donate. And he was like, you would think that you can just go to people and give them stats about poverty and then they'll want to donate. No, you have to tell them a story. Like, this is Keri, and she's in this country and she's suffering this, and this is and that's when people donate, is when you paint a picture for them and you touch their emotions.
Right. Wyatt, I'm gonna say one last thing, but I want to thank you for contributing and telling your story. So I appreciate you coming on.
Hey, Adam, real quick,
Yep.
can I read, just because the geeky part of me just wants to read this out loud. Remember when I told you about this deeply problematic alt-right white supremacist patriarchal song by the OJs called Family Reunion?
Yes.
Just listen to some of these lyrics. You guys should go look up this song, especially if you're young and you haven't heard it before. It's the OJ's Family Reunion. Here's some lyrics. It says, family reunion, the family is the solution to the world's problems today. Now let's take a look at the family. In the family, the father is like the head, the leader, the director, not domineering, but showing love, guidance for everyone else in the family. Now, if we could get all the fathers of the world to stand up and be fathers, that would be great. I'm not going to read the rest of it, but he goes through each family member. And if you read this today, you're like, oh my gosh, they would call this alt-right. They would try to ban it.
The alt-right OJs.
Right. Okay, that's all. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you. I want to give one last thing, and it kind of bounces off of what you were saying, Keri. Telling a story and the right telling a story. And it's a perfect shameless plug for my book, Black Victim, the Black Victor. Within my book, I actually started writing kind of in the way that Keri was saying, like, giving some statistics and being more matter of fact. But a good friend of mine, a woman, told me that women read books too, and you need to have some emotion in it. I was like, you know what? She's right. So that's why when I am talking about single parent homes and as to what it does to kids, I'm using my personal story, and I'm being very open and honest and truthful as to my feelings growing up, my feelings about my mother, feelings about my father, especially. And I'm using that story to paint a picture as to why single parent homes is not a good idea. At the very least, it's not ideal. And here is a story of a kid who grew up with that, who didn't have his father in his life, and what it did to me as a young man, and how I struggled into my adulthood because of it, of being behind everybody else who was able to grow up with both their parents. So, Keri, you're absolutely right. The right needs to do a better job, and I think for the right, they are doing a better job because there are more, if you want to use the word like disenfranchised, former liberals like myself, who have moved over to the right, um, especially who understand this aspect. We look at like the walkaway movement, former liberals, former people on the left who understand this aspect and how to rally people behind it. So I think the right is doing better. It's not just a bunch of like, pocket nerds who want to regurgitate economics. I think there are more of us who are using a personal story and understanding as to why this is the case, why we should advocate for certain things. And so at least that's what I'm trying to do. And I'll use my personal story to make a case for family and, in some respects for God, if people want to listen to me. So yeah, I wanted to add that as like my final piece, but I'm really glad that we were able to have such a great conversation for so long, and I had zero technical difficulties. I didn't want to jinx myself before, but like like the past few times I've been trying to do this, I've had some type of problems. So I'm really happy that this is not the case. Keri, I've said this before. Keri is like probably my favorite person that I ran into online. I was fascinated by her story. She has like the Unsafe Space is like the only thing I consistently give super chat money to, because I'm in full support of what her and Carter are trying to do. And she's built something special with the Unsafe Space family. And so I'm one of the children of Unsafe Space trying to branch off and do my own thing and represent. So I'll always reference back to Keri and Unsafe Space and everything that you guys have helped me with. So thank you,
That
Keri.
is so kind. And I love our community, and I love seeing all the familiar faces in the chat. And I hope next year we can afford to bring people out for our retreat, because I would love to have you here for it. We, for anyone who doesn't know, we did our first Unsafe Space retreat in Texas in August, and we had about 50 people, I think. It was awesome. It was just cool to like see people in real life and build more of that
Yeah.
community. And I say community, and I make that distinction between it's not collectivism, it's individuals choosing voluntarily to be in a community. Anyway, thank you, Adam. Thanks for hosting this and teaching me about the Twitter talkies.
I like that phrase, the Twitter talkies. But thank you again, Keri. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I want to try and do this, if possible, once a week. So, follow me here on Twitter. I got a lot of stuff to say, and hopefully you'll be there next time. So everybody, have a wonderful night. Sleep well. Be safe. Stay away from the COVID, and let Brandon know that we are all behind him. So let's go, Brandon. Have a good night.